Hello, and welcome to our build guide video for the Melee Poison Assassin. The newly improved Perfect Agony Keystone is an immensely powerful addition to the Assassin arsenal. With this keystone, you will convert all your critical strike multiplier into damage over time multiplier for ailments, but your non-critical strikes cannot inflict ailments at all. It greatly boosts the effectiveness of the already powerful critical poison archetype and makes scaling much easier, as previously many choices were suboptimal. The Assassin is by far the best option to ensure your first hit to critically strike and inflict poison strong enough to finish most enemies. As an Assassin, you also gain 25% more damage for critical poisons, another 25% more damage while fighting only one powerful enemy, free culling strike, reflect immunity, and your poisons last twice as much. It only lacks a defensive side, which you must cover up with your items and endurance charges. The special heist dagger allows you to inflict poison with all damage types. Flat elemental damage is much more abundant than chaos or physical types, not only on the weapon itself, but also from other sources such as auras or support gems. It also opens up the possibility to use attack skills with initial damage conversions. The main skill of choice for this setup is very flexible. We have chosen the Blade Flurry for its amazing damage and decent clear speed, but if you dislike channeling, you can try any other melee skill such as Frost Blades or Reeve, which will require minimal adjustments on the passive tree. It is a life build with a decent amount of energy shield. Most of your damage reduction comes from endurance charges and spell suppression. High evasion rating causes you to evade most incoming attacks and recover energy shield when you take damage. You will have very high attack speed, great mobility, explosions, and enough damage to kill most enemies with a single poison. The build can reach a ridiculous amount of damage with any melee skill, but you need to ramp up the poison and wither stacks to achieve that. You don't need most of the items listed in this guide to achieve good damage, but the charge setup simply makes it much more powerful, durable, and easier to assemble. The frenzy stacking setup is a convenient way to get a lot of damage, attack speed, and damage mitigation all at once. Getting more frenzy charges is obviously a solid upgrade, but you don't need all of them to start. The Anathema is one of the best rings in the game, but only if you can find a way to automate all your extra curses. With the replica version of this popular amulet, all your investments into maximum frenzy charges will also apply to endurance charges. It also significantly lowers the cooldown of your Withering Step, which is very important to sustain all 15 stacks of this powerful debuff. This belt raises your frenzy charge limit and turns them into affliction charges, which grants you 8% more damage with ailments instead. This belt alone is not worth using as you would lose attack speed, but thanks to your boots you can have both effects at once. With the Ralakesh Impatience boots equipped, you can preserve both benefits of the frenzy and affliction charges at once. You also don't need to worry about generating or losing endurance charges, which provide most of your mitigation against physical damage. With those gloves, you will automatically apply the Temporal Chain's Curse on hit and explode killed enemies. The explosion has no initial critical strike chance, so it won't inflict poisons, but it still speeds up your clear speed considerably. It is also fairly cheap to get a Corrupted Implicit that raises your frenzy charge limit. With this ring you will be able to use 4 curses. Other modifiers aren't that useful, so at least try to get a Corrupted Implicit that grants flat elemental damage or attack speed. The Brutal Restraint Jewel can improve your Flask sustain, grant you the Onslaught buff during clearing, and improve your poison damage or attack speed a bit. You can also use the Lethal Pride for strength and critical strike multiplier instead. The Watcher's Eye Jewel can give you tons of critical strike multiplier when you use the Anger Aura. You can also include a level 1 precision to get extra attack speed or critical strike multiplier, but such combinations can be very expensive. The Light of Meaning grants you an insane amount of chaos damage. It competes with the timeless jewel spots, so you will have to choose between pure damage and utility. You can borrow any notable from other Shadow's ascendancies, which can cover the defenses that Assassin lacks. The Swift Killer is the best choice that greatly boosts both your damage and defense, but it can be quite expensive. Usually poison can only be applied by physical and chaos damage, but with this setup you can use elemental damage too. On your rare items, you should focus on attack speed, defense, and utility, such as reduced mana costs of skills. Avoid damage over time multiplier, as the perfect Agony keystone overwrites it. You will need a special pneumatic dagger, so your elemental damage can inflict poison. The high critical strike chance and attack speed are more impactful than flat elemental damage here, but all those properties are important. Use Crafting Bench to add a modifier to never miss an attack, so you don't have to worry about accuracy elsewhere. Your shield should provide a high amount of maximum life and spell suppression chance. On top of that, it should grant you a bit of resistance or attack speed. Later on, you can try to include an extra block chance too. On the helmet, you should look for simple defensive modifiers, but it is also possible to get plenty of mana reservation efficiency here. You can also use the focus modifier to apply all your curses at once. On a rare armor, you should look for tons of evasion, energy shield, and spell suppression or resistance. You can skip life modifiers to benefit from the life mastery and save a lot of currency. Eldritch Implicits grants you a critical strike multiplier and a bit of damage taken conversion. You can get plenty of damage on your rare ring in the form of flat elemental damage or critical strike multiplier, but usually it is more important to focus on defense and attributes. You can also lower the mana cost of your non-channeling skills to make your whirling blades free to use. Here you can gain a lot of critical strike multiplier, maximum life, and attack speed. It can also provide lacking resistance or attributes, or make you immune to corrupting blood. They should be replaced by unique jewels later on, so don't spend too much currency on them. The Overwhelming Malice notable grants you the Unholy Might, which greatly improves your uptime of the Withering debuff. The second notable should be Unholy Grace, which grants you a lot of attack speed and chaos damage. The third notable should be the Wicked Pull or Unwaveringly Evil. Other options are not that good. If you use area skills such as Blade Flurry, you should get a clustered jewel that enlarges your area of effect. For strike or projectile skills, you will need relevant notables on the passive tree, such as Attack Mastery or Piercing Shots. A good Poisonberry tincture can grant you tons of attack speed and damage for poisons. You should try to have at least 10% unreserved mana to comfortably sustain it for a longer time. You should use a defensive set of flasks that grant you evasion rating and spell suppression chance, reduce the effect of curses, and can disable bleed. Diamond Flask greatly helps with consistency during clearing, but you heavily overcap your crit chance against bosses. Channeling Blade Flurry quickly attacks enemies in front of you and generates stages, which improve your damage and cause you to release additional strikes when channeling ends. For optimal DPS, you should restart the channel as soon as you gain all stages. The optimal support gem setup depends on the amount of charges, flat elemental damage, and crit multiplier you have from your gear, and the type of skill you are using. The Deadly Ailment support is usually the best way to improve your poison damage, but it weakens your clear speed and life leech. Anger is an offensive aura that grants you a lot of flat fire damage and enables various Watcher's Eye modifiers. Purity of Elements is a defensive aura that grants you a lot of elemental resistance and makes you immune to most ailments. Herald of Agony grants you a bit of damage with poisons. You can also use the flesh and stone to reduce the damage of nearby enemies. You don't need the Enlightened support or reservation efficiency on your helmet to use those auras, but it greatly helps with comfort and sustaining the mana burn from your tincture. Withering Step grants you an elusive buff and applies a few stacks of withered debuff on nearby enemies. Thanks to the replica badge of the Brotherhood, its cooldown is very low. The automation will trigger the Withering Steps as often as possible to ensure high uptime of withered stacks on your enemies, but it makes using other movement skills with shared cooldown impossible. Assassin's Mark is a curse skill that increases your critical strike chance against marked enemies. With the perfect Agony keystone, it grants you a lot of damage over time multiplier. Keep in mind this mark applies only after you hit a rare or unique enemy. You can't count on it to boost your critical strike chance during clearing, which is why you need to overcap your critical strike chance so much. You will have very high attack speed but low movement speed, so the Whirling Blades is the best movement skill for this setup. Even though your damage is sourced from elemental damage, your poison still deals chaos damage, so you should use the Despair Curse to lower the relevant resistance. To use this setup comfortably, you will need the mana cost reduction modifier on your ring, otherwise you can use life tap support and cast the curse manually. Immortal Call is the only guard skill that provides decent damage reduction, even on the low gem levels, which is important to trigger it more often. Enfeeble is a defensive curse that lowers the damage of affected enemies. You could also trigger it via focus modifier on your helmet instead. The level of your cast when damage taken support affects how often it triggers and what spells it can trigger. Keep it on a low level to be more reliable. Plague Bearer stores a portion of your poison damage. You can activate it to release a damaging area effect upon nearby enemies. The final damage of your Plague depends on gem levels, which you can improve with the Empower support. The Wither debuff will also make your enemies take more damage from this skill. You can kill all bandits to get an additional passive skill point, or help Alira to lower the cost of your gear. The Major Soul of Arakali will greatly help with damage over time effects, especially if your chaos resistance is still low. With the Minor Soul of Ralakesh, bleeding effects won't be as dangerous. You can also use Soul of Shikari if enemy poisons are bothering you too much. You can level up with any physical attack skill you prefer or have access to. The Cobra Lash is a great skill for the first acts, but its damage starts to fall off quickly. We recommend Reeve or Pestilent Strike. Avoid Blade Flurry at first. It requires a lot of attack speed and area of effect to be effective. You don't need to use daggers during the campaign. You should use whatever provides the most physical or chaos DPS. Do not use Perfect Agony during the campaign either, as your critical strike chance will be too low. You can check out our written build guide on the website for more leveling tips and adjusted passive tree progression. In the final passive tree, you will barely pick up any poison-related notables. As with the Perfect Agony, the regular damage over time multiplier bonuses are wasted. The exception here is the Swift Venoms, notable for attack speed and faster ramp-up of your poison from the mastery. The Dagger notables grant you a lot of damage with ailments, attack speed, and guarantee to inflict poison on critical strikes. If you want to use Strike skill, you should pick up the Multi-Shot notable for attack speed and extra strike target mastery. You might also want the Piercing Shot to get extra coverage with projectiles. That should cover this build for you. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.